All right, so my name is Pam Maples, and I am a remedial project manager for the Navajo Nation EPA Superfund Division. And I'm going to tell you a story about how a petroleum contamination investigation led to recognizing the environmental conditions of a brownfield site. I was working for the leaking storage tank program before I moved over to Superfund, and I inherited this site in 2016. This is the Navajo Forestry Products Industry site. It's 100 fenced acres, and it was a sawmill and particle board manufacturing facility that closed in 1997. I inherited the site in 2016 and have done a lot of work on it, but it goes back and forth between phase 1 and phase 2. Every new thing that we find goes right back to a new phase 1. This is the layout of the entire site. You can see there's concrete structure pads where buildings used to be. There's a building there and a water tower. And really the only building left standing from the facility is this one over here. While performing oversight on the leaking storage tank program, I began to walk the site. I like to be in high places, and I really wanted to climb up there and have a look, but I settled for the bluffs behind the site because I couldn't reach the ladder on the water tower. So what I saw was concerning to me, the different colors everywhere. And so without further ado, let us jump right in. I went online because nobody could give me a picture of what the place had looked like. And so on eBay, I found a postcard, and I found 4 of them actually, so I bought them. And this is the postcard. And I want to talk about scale. That's a pickup truck right there. These are mobile homes. So this is a big facility. It had a 50 megawatt power plant that powered the facility and the town, I came to find out. It had associated double cooling tower and above ground storage tanks to power various things on the site. I started talking to people and searching records, and what I found out was that the particle board plant here, this is where its footprint will be when it was built in 1983. The original map that I found lurking in one of our dusty file cabinets was this plat, and this is all I had for a long time, but there were still some alarming things on here like that, and sawmill, and this pond, and then this of course is the tank battery over here. But I was looking around and I found an old pamphlet, and I was able to put names on the buildings finally. And my petroleum contamination is this area here. It's 22,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil right there, and looks very small compared with the size of the site. Later, after our memory days, when I was talking with former employees, and they brought pictures, and it was great, and like Laurel said, we fed them, so they came. I was able to do the diagram of how a tree is made into a board or into plywood and then sold. And again, the petroleum contamination is right here. Part of my duty was to find out what was in those guys. Even though it said used oil, I had my doubts. So we had them characterized and removed, just under 3,000 gallons. And they tested as non-hazardous, so we were able to dispose of them at a fuel recycling facility. And I got a waste manifest on the contents of these 2 tankers so that I know they just didn't go out into an arroyo somewhere. The investigation started looking for fuel because of this. This is a fueling island that we found, and so we right away started trenching to look for a tank. Didn't find any. We did find soil and groundwater contaminated well above our cleanup standards. And so the next suspect, of course, was the AST battery. So we went looking there and drilled some holes. This will be a phase 2. And we drilled a boring between the two, and it came up clean all the way down, and even the water was clean. And that's really strange, because right over here, we found 2 feet of diesel floating on the groundwater. So after it was all said and done, this is the area of contaminated groundwater, and just a little bit smaller than that is the soil. And so we got to thinking, we wanted to know if we had perhaps missed another source, missed a tank or something. So we did some geophysics, X-ray vision. On the right, you see the blue coloration. This is an EM61. It's an electromagnetic resonating device, and it finds metal. And we found metal. This is the tank basin here. And we found this pipe going over here to this fueling island that we found when we were hacking through the brush. So this is a second fueling island. But then we also found this Y, and the diesel floating on groundwater is right there. And this goes over to the power plant, sits over here. And the power plant burned waste shavings. But I'll have to rethink that now that I see this pipe going over here. And we did an excavation to get rid of a lot of the contaminated soil right here, and to confirm that that was in fact what was going on. There was a Y. That was a engine block right there. We couldn't see through the cement here because it was reinforced. So we did radar here, and we did radar here and here because there was too much metal on the ground. So these are the results of the radar, and you can see the rebar, but no tanks. So let's see. We have these 2 wells. These were facility wells. There's 6 of them. There's one down here, one up here, there. And these 2 were getting close to our contaminated groundwater here. So we wanted to see how deep they were, sample them, and then plug and abandon them properly. And so we sampled them. They're 75 feet deep. And groundwater here is at 20 feet, 18 to 20. We sampled them, and they came back clean for petroleum and clean for the RCRA heavy metals, PCBs, and pesticides. But lo and behold, they came back hot as a firecracker for asbestos, which that was unexpected, and caused me a lot of sleepless nights until I finally settled on the concrete in the space between the well casing and the rocks is called the annular space, and it's often full of concrete. And in 1958, when they would have drilled these wells, that concrete probably had asbestos fibers in it, because asbestos doesn't flow through groundwater. So that's my plan right now. It's my story, and I'm sticking with it till proven otherwise. So in determining what the heck was going on at this site, I started doing a record search. We used to have a hazardous waste program. When the EPA started, it turned into all the different divisions we have, but I got access to their records, and I found a presentation on the forestry products, and they found 14 tanks. None of them are in compliance. And of all these tanks, these 2, I don't know where they are. I've never seen them. And it apparently said chemical on it. There was one antifreeze tank. I used to know where that one was, but it vanished. I haven't seen it for a number of years. And then these are the violations that they were found in violation of. So that led me back to looking at different files, and I found some different pictures in another box that was completely unrelated, but they were obviously forestry products. And those 2 white chemical tanks, I think that might be them. And given where they're sitting, they were probably the formaldehyde tanks. The guys told me that they got tanker truckloads of formaldehyde 24/7 for something like 45 years. And apparently they stored them in those tanks. These are the above ground storage tank battery when it was fully tanked up, as it were. That fueling island we found by cutting the brush is right there. The other one is off camera there.
Hey, Pam?
Yes?
Mark asks, what made you decide to test for asbestos, especially since it doesn't move through the groundwater?
Because I saw asbestos laying everywhere on the surface. And that asbestos test happened after I had some other asbestos testing done because of the wood burning kiln that's on the property. And we'll get to that.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. So Ponderosa Products was a particle board factory, and they had a fire suppression system, some of that great PFAS right there. They had whatever the heck that was. I'm not even sure what that is. All the buildings are gone, so it's everybody's guess, right? Walking around the site, you know, this is the kiln, the wood kiln. These are cars parked in the parking lot, again, for scale. Want to go out on the front slab of the building. This was the particle board plant, and there's some sumps, and this is where the giant press sat that made the actual boards. It looks like that when there's water in it. The foam you see was the contractor who took away the metal buildings. It was his solution to render this thing safe. He filled it full of great stuff foam, which didn't last a year and is to be found blowing throughout the site. This sump is 80 feet long and 25 feet wide and 12 feet deep. Here at the edge, I stuck a pipe down in there and pulled it out and measured it. And I must have stuck it here because later I found this picture. It's more like 35 feet deep in the middle. And this was the brace for the big press that sat in there. There is no egress. There are no ladders. If you're a swimmer, you can hoist yourself up out of there. But this would be a physical drowning hazard, which is part of a brownfield site, a physical hazard. And in the summer, when it's down low, you know, unless you're really super strong, that's 3 feet. It's going to be nearly impossible to pull yourself up out of there. And while the site is fenced, it's got some holes cut in it so people can take shortcuts through there. So the wood drying kiln, what you see there is a mirror, just a relic of what the whole facility. There used to be concrete pads out here with railway car tracks on them, and then pads out here. The roof and the building are gone. This is the subroof. So from my vantage point, looking at these pictures, my very next trip was back to the tribal vehicle to grab the old full face respirator and head over there to see what it really looked like. And what it really looks like is friable asbestos paint peeling off and flaking off and blowing around in the breeze. And the roof top is, this is transite, which is an asbestos containing material. It's corrugated like corrugated steel, but it's transite. And it turns out that it's more like a lasagna. There's a couple layers with tar and stuff in between, and it's all asbestos containing material. These were the vents that let the heat out when they wanted to. Each one of these bays is large enough to hold a railroad flat car. And so they would shove them in there, fire them off, and then open the vents and let the steam out when they were dry. So this was alarming to me. And so I called up the USA EPA Superfund Federal On-Scene Coordinator, and I wanted to find out if there was any kind of emergency response action available. At this point, I'm still working for the storage tank program, but I'm stepping out of bounds. And so I called up the on-scene coordinator, and I used the words friable asbestos and daycare center in the same sentence. And they were out the next day. And we now have an emergency removal action scheduled. And if it hadn't been for the pandemic, this building would be gone. We had a site walk last week to discuss logistics. So probably in the spring, this building is going to come down. They're going to abate the asbestos and then take it down. As I was looking for asbestos sources for that water, I came across some old phase 1 investigation pictures that I didn't even know existed until somebody told me they had one, and I asked them for a copy. This is the power plant building, and they did in fact burn waste shavings, but I think they got it started with diesel. But when the contractor took this building down to salvage the metal, do you see this material here? It turns out this was a 2-layer corrugated steel building with asbestos matting in between. And they did some abatement before they took these buildings down. I don't know that they went so far as to pull the matting out from between these 2 layers. I don't know. I don't have a report on that. I do know that these bags showed up in one of my petroleum excavations one day, and I had to have a talk with the contractor and have him get them out of there and give me a waste manifest so I know where he put them. So identifying hazards, there's a thing here. It's a pump and enough concrete cradles to tell me that there was a tank. And so I had this hose sampled, and turns out it was propane. So yay, propane. Not something that I regulate. This is that big sump there and the little sump. I call this one the Contaminated Wetlands because it's full of deformed vegetation and frogs with 3 legs. But right over here next, there's something sticking up out of the ground. I don't know what it is, but I'm pretty sure the gasket is asbestos containing right here. When I had them, this is the AST basin, and when it was open, they piled all their chemicals and drums and totes and as bagged up asbestos that they found in all these buildings into my convenient excavation there. And so I politely called them up and asked them to make their own berm, which they did over here with hay bales and a liner. And there are things in there. There's premium saw glide. Those drums are full. I don't know what's in this one, and it's not labeled. There's a tote, and it's got a cast number on it, and I looked it up, and it's ferrous chloride solution. And I went back to the hazard section, and it said, don't even get within 50 yards of that drum without a level A hazmat suit on. And they've moved it twice. And I have pictures of it sitting in the powerhouse on the ground floor in the midst of corroded concrete footers. So I don't know what's in it. I'm not going to go check it either. They made a trash pile over here, and this is the trash pile, and it has drums in it and a tote and stuff and tires, and it's just a mess. When I was out walking around one year, the face of this excavation kind of slumped away and revealed these guys. And I'd like to think they were empty, but not so sure. The fact that they're sitting upright and were covered makes me wonder what's in them. So that's the water tower, and it's not rusty. I'm thinking lead-based paint. And this valve in the bottom is open, and I don't know if that means the tank is full or the tank is empty. There was a PCB removal action in like 2006, I think it was, and walking around the site over there, I tripped over this. It says transformer oil. Walking around on the other side of the site, I found a drum of premium hydraulic fluid. And you can just see the TSI, which is thermal system insulation, just laying everywhere from when they busted up the buildings. Our emergency removal action is going to include policing the entire 100 acres, walking shoulder to shoulder and picking up stuff like this. So that's cool. Then I came across a box of photographs labeled NFPI. And I knew for sure that this is a picture of the AST battery. And so I was frankly appalled at all of this stuff. And these aren't even really the ugly pictures. I've got bulging drums with oozing stuff coming out of them. And whatever's in there, I don't even know, mercury storage. So that it's time now to talk about data gathering and accuracy. Back in the day, you would have a roll of film and you would be overtaking pictures, and you didn't want to send a roll of film off with one picture on it. So you waited and you took other pictures and then you sent your film in. But these guys didn't take photo notes, and they labeled the package NFPI. And so here I am with all these things, and I show them to the guys at Memory Day because I really wanted to know about the mercury in particular. And they said, we never had any Quonset huts. And we never had any drums like this. We kept all of our drums inside because we were a model demonstration enterprise. And so I said, look at these red rocks. And they said, these are not our red rocks. And that was interesting. I had to stop and think, okay, whose red rocks are they? And I have some other pictures that show this rock at a different angle. And that turns out to be Pyramid Rock over near Gallup, New Mexico. And so now this begs the question, if this is the only picture out of this whole ugly slide that goes to my sawmill, where is this place? So I guess I'll be looking into that later. We have a trash dump associated with the facility. It's 3 miles long. It's up a creek. And what you see there is sawdust. For as far as you can see is sawdust. And we know for sure that there's formaldehyde in the sawdust and wood chips. The thing used to catch on fire. It burnt for months. It burnt for years. They got it put out, which now I got to think about the PFAS over in the creek and just everywhere, because they used water, they used foam, they used everything they could, and they washed out some drums while they were hosing it down. So yeah, I just have a lot of job security here, I think. Getting towards the end. The sawdust pile initially, this is the fenced compound, and the sawdust pile initially visibly is here. But after having my memory days and talking to the guys and asking them what went in there, and every trash from the town and from the facility went into this dump. And the sawdust in the dump is actually bigger than I thought it was. And it is underneath some housing right here, which is interesting. Back to the drawing board, looking at more legal records and things. This shows 29 years of operation with non-regulated discharges going into places where they shouldn't have gone. They had Navajo Tribal Utility Authority and NFPI went head to head very often because NTUA was accusing the sawmill of discharging stuff into their lagoons, which was causing stuff to precipitate out at an alarming rate, which they had to haul off and dispose somewhere. So there's a dangling question that I haven't even looked at yet. I have no answer for where they took their sludge. But Forestry Products said, no, no, no. But then they had to admit that, okay, we discharge into your lagoon, so we don't discharge into Black Creek. And they were discharging cooling tower blowdown water. And since all of the records of this plant went up in a fire, there really isn't any lists of what they used, but the industry standard was several acids to etch things off the pipes, and then several descalants and things used to precipitate stuff out. And of the boiler water, and the industry standard of the day is hexavalent chromium. So I know it's here, and I just have to find it. But then later, they were caught discharging into Black Creek anyway when their discharge pipe broke. So they discharged into both, but I don't know if it was above the dam that they used to fill Red Lake or below the dam. So that's something I'm going to investigate this summer. I applied for and got a targeted brownfields assessment tool And so we're going to look into the hexavalent chromium, because if it's there, I need to know it. This was that, I did a search and I found a released 1999 document where US EPA had the site listed as a Superfund site, but then released it, because apparently this was all having to do with the PCB removal, which I thought was at the substation for the particle board plant, but the guys at the memory day told me, no, we had a switching gear over here on the south of the site, because the power plant came to this area and they could turn off the town, or they could turn off the plant, or they could turn off everything if they needed to work on it. And this was all, there were transformers. This was the removal action site. And this is also where I tripped over the drum of transformer oil. They must have missed one. I kicked it, it's empty. That doesn't mean it didn't used to be empty. More about accuracy, I found this in my searching as well. This is the only other thing that came up. It's from a real estate site. And it says it's an archive Superfund site, doesn't require any cleanup action or any further investigation at this time. So there's that. Bring your family, it's safe, according to this real estate site anyway, who apparently inspected it in 2013, because nobody I know inspected it in 2013. So it must have been those guys. Mr. Home Fax Meter. I found talking to our water department, that there had been a fish study done by Fish and Wildlife and Navajo EPA surface and groundwater. And the takeaway is that the fish in Red Lake had way more methyl mercury than any other lake in the entire region. Way more. So where did the mercury come from? This is a good question. There's an old sawmill up on the hill, upwind as it were, and they had a coal-fired power plant. So maybe the mercury came from there. I don't know. They drained the lake to fix the dam, and now they're refilling it. When we were doing the petroleum contamination, we did one removal here of that contaminated soil right here, 500 cubic yards of it. Didn't see anything suspicious, and the stench was amazing. But we did a bunch of borings. We did geotechnical, like a geoprobe, all through here. We did borings, and we found that our contaminated soil was in a big area. And so I developed a plan to land farm it. And right about the time, right after I put it out to bid and got a contractor on board, we came out and we noticed that we were standing right next to some of the roofing from the kiln. And so we did a quick random sample for surface asbestos, just soil, and half of the samples came back above the NESHAP action levels. NESHAP is National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants, and the soil samples from these areas were above the standard, the action level. So then we decided we better go see if it's just at the surface. And so we had a contractor come out and grid off the whole area. And she did composite 5-point samples down to 2 feet. And within the green area is all down to 2 feet, asbestos above the action levels. And this is the AST basin, and this is where the fuel was floating on the groundwater. And so now I can't touch this soil because it's got asbestos down to 2 feet at least. So we have to think of something else. The composite now here at the end, putting it all together, I have free product floating on the groundwater here. There were 2 feet of it, but I had a solar powered sipper on there and got it down to a sheen, but that was turned off 2 years ago. The red is benzene in water. The dotted lines mean it could go further, it could go less, we don't know. The green is discrete samples at the bottom of the well because I was sampling for heavy metals and I went ahead and did benzene anyway. So at the very bottoms of my wells, there is benzene. This is the asbestos in soil results. This is the asbestos to 2 feet results. And that's where that part of that stand. And this is why we sampled the water wells, because we saw the asbestos on site. And since we were sampling for everything else, we figured, what the heck, might as well sample for asbestos too. And there it was. So in conclusion, this is a current aerial photograph of the complete site. This is the fenced compound. This is the petroleum contamination. These are the former sewer lagoons where they discharged into. This is confirmed asbestos in soil, confirmed with a phase 2 investigation. This is suspected asbestos, talking to the guys, phase 1, we know where they kept it. This is the dam on Black Creek. These are the sediments where people actually grow plants. They use the water from the lake for irrigation. High school, elementary school, charter school, chapter house. We did do asbestos dust wipes on the chapter house, the charter school, and the nation's gas. They were all non-detect, thank God. This is the housing area, and they are filling Red Lake back up without sampling the sediments because I couldn't make them do it working for the tank program. And now that I work for Superfund, it's already full of water. But we're thinking about maybe draining it to use the water to keep the kiln building wet to do the asbestos abatement. I have to sell that to the chapter, so wish me luck. Questions, discussion?
Pam, this is Perry Charlie. How is the Red Lake currently being used? Talking about any irrigation purposes, recreation.
Right. So I talked to the farm
how
board.
It's being used?
I talked to the farm board the other day. There are 2 farmers using it for irrigation this year. And the chapter, we applied for the Brownfields Assessment Grant. We didn't get it last year. For 2020, we didn't get it. And to apply for the grant, we had to do a lot of community outreach and chapter meetings and discussions about reuse plans and make plans. And they want to have recreation on the lake, and they want to have, development, and they want to use it for irrigation. But with the old study with the methyl mercury in the fish being so high, like it said 1 fish per month. If you were a child, you shouldn't eat any, but if you're an adult or a nursing mother, 1 fish per month at the very most, because of the mercury in the fish. And so I really want to sample the sediments of the lake.
Wow. Pam, Mark Junker asked a question. What is the goal for the site?
So the goal is to get it cleaned up and then redevelop some kind of light industry or tourism-based industry or artist-based industry, something that will employ the people in the town, because there was a thriving community here. They had the library and community centers and churches, and they had all kinds of stuff. But when the plant closed abruptly, there was no contingency plan, and so the community is decimated, the housing is burnt and vandalized, and the goal is to put something back here that will revitalize the community. And they've been really working together to try to come up with a plan.
This is Perry again. How are jurisdictional authorities affected in this area, if any? I know this is very close to the New Mexico-Arizona state line, and then you have the Navajo Nation. How is that affecting the cleanup?
So the site is completely, even the lagoons are in New Mexico. And it's like 12 square miles, I think. The whole town an industry site has already been withdrawn back in the 50s for the use of Navajo, New Mexico. But not Navajo, New Mexico, for the use of the Navajo community, Navajo Nation. New Mexico has no jurisdiction here. It's complete tribal land. So the Navajo Nation EPA has jurisdiction, and it was a tribal enterprise. And so the responsibility lies with the tribe. They were the owner, and ultimately the responsibility lies with them, but the tribe has no ability to pay for a massive investigation and cleanup of this scale. And so we're going to get the tribal, we're going to get the, we've got a targeted brownfields assessment. US EPA is going to spend money looking for the hexavalent chromium. I've got an environmental justice grant to help get word out to the community about what we're doing and what their plans are. And I hope to get the assessment, the brownfields assessment grant. Again, I applied for $350,000, and we've also applied with tribal council right before the pandemic, unfortunately, to get tribal council to commit to a certain amount of money every year to just get this going. And they're in agreement, they want to do it, but then we have a pandemic, so priorities.